with that, I'm going to hand it over for our next panel on the perils and pitfalls of cultural ambassadorship to our Montana Poet Laureate, Chris Latreille.
Bonjour, bon après-midi, Indinawe Maganadug. That is hello and good afternoon, all of my relatives. This is the panel that when we were first talking about IndigiPalooza that was the first thing I dreamed of. The idea of assembling a bunch of people who all are out in the world talking about their language and their culture. And we have folks here representing 4 different Native communities. And I'm excited because I'm a big fan of all of these folks. And I was a little astounded just moments ago to think that, well, don't you all already know each other? You know, this is like the Justice League. Justice League. As far as people who I really admire who are out there spreading the word about who we are and where we came from and where we are today, probably more importantly. What is our lives like in the modern world when everybody wants to think that indigenous ingenuity and the way that we live in the world somehow ended in 1870s with colonialism and all this stuff? And no, we've always been survivors. And our culture and our languages change in our efforts to survive before colonialism. And what we do today is just a continuation of that thing. And we have 4 folks here that I think speak very well to not only where we came from, but where we are today and what we need to do in the future. And I'm not going to introduce, we have Aspen and James and Shane and Jesse, but I will let them introduce themselves as I address them in conversation. But I want to begin with my friend Aspen, because Aspen is from the Flathead Reservation, Confederated Salish and Kootenai, which is, we are in their place, which is why we're flying this beautiful flag all day today. And correct me if I'm wrong, Aspen, but you are the first person in the history of the University of Montana to graduate with a master's degree in linguistics for the Salish language. Is that correct? And Aspen is an artist and a cultural person and a language person, but I want to begin with the language. You're raising your children so that Salish is their first language. And what first language means is that's the language spoken in the home. That's the first connection you make to communication, the way we do it as human people with our language. Why? You know, you were a young woman. You don't have a microphone? You can borrow mine. So what moved you to do that? You know, you were a young woman at the time. And we always say that young people don't care about this stuff, but obviously you did.
Good day, everyone. My Indian name is Shining Camas Woman. I'm a member of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes, and that includes 3 different tribes. The Bitterroot Salish, the Tataayakin, which I make this sign in plain sign language, and it was a misconception that we were flathead, even though we were saying these like hair that poofs up, stands on top. So I'm Bitterroot Salish, Kudlispe Salish, so it's Upper Kalispel Salish, and Kasanka. To go back to kind of your question, my entire life's work has been revolved around language revitalization efforts. Ever since I was a kid, I grew up around our culture and our language. And when I went to Nkusum when I was 13, one of my late elders, my main Sedlish teacher, Patalik Pierre, the first day that I started, I was kind of thinking about, like, I want to do sports, and they don't have it here, and all these things, like maybe I'll go back to public school. But it was that, he talked, and a lot of my different elders, they talked about how we need more children speakers. We need more of our youth starting to learn the language because it's up to us to keep it alive. And his talk just kind of shaped my passion, and I knew from that time on that I'm going to speak to my kids one day, and I'm going to learn it. And so that's just kind of where my life's journey has gone ever since then. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Well, you mentioned Inkusum, and Jesse DesRosier is here from the Blackfeet Reservation. You've taught and worked with Cutswood, which is similar to Inkusum. What is Cutswood?
So really, I find a lot of similarities with Aspen. I was given the opportunity to learn my language, and it all started with a dream from Daryl Kipp, a crazy man, 1978 was the Freedom of Religion Act, and that was the first time it was legal for us to speak our language and practice our culture. Well, around 1987, Daryl Kipp came out of Harvard, and it started with them asking why their generation weren't taught the language when their parents were speakers. They were all boarding school, residential school survivors, and that led them to do a survey wondering how many fluent speakers were left in our community. And what they found was really alarming, that the majority of the first language speakers that we had left were in their 70s. And if there wasn't any work done, within 20 years our language could die. And initially I think they started out to do a dictionary. So they invited some grandmothers in, but those grandmothers brought grandchildren. And that sparked an idea to teach children language, And how he modeled it was off of the Maori and the Hawaiians. And he went completely separate than tribe. We didn't accept tribal funding, state funding, or federal funding because of some of the red tape. But Daryl really modeled a system that harvested language for children, through immersion. And as a young boy, I was in 3rd grade when my younger brother started at immersion school. My mother was never taught her language. And when she asked her grandmothers and mother, why did you ever teach me my language? They said, because we loved you. We didn't want you to suffer like we did. And my mother, out of curiosity, started volunteering at the immersion school. And the reason I started was I wanted to play basketball, like sports, Cutswood fighting muskrats. As a kid, I never understood how important language was. It was just, I never had an interest in Western education. I never was good at math, or anything like that. But language for me was just something natural. It just was a part of it all. I didn't understand the importance of language until I got out of Cutswood. But I owe everything to that dream that Daryl had, Daryl Ropes Kipp. And the legacy of his school is still continuing on today. And it can still be seen in our community. It's outstretched, and I've seen a lot of great success through that. I could say through my lifetime. It's not only shaped my life and gave me everything, but it's gave my community so much wealth and identity. And I owe everything to Daryl Kipp and the school that he provided, if that makes sense.
No, it's great. Thank you. So immersion schools, and to me that was always just kind of a no-brainer, but I was recently at the University of Montana speaking to a group of international scholars and teachers and who come every summer, and they spend like a month here, and they're left this morning to spend a couple weeks in New York City and Washington, D.C. before they go out. And they're from all over the world. There was a gentleman there from Kenya and people from Sri Lanka and Pakistan and all over the world. And there was a woman from one of the Eastern European countries who said, you have such strange words. What is this immersion? What do you mean by immersion? What does this thing even mean? And Inkusum and Cutswood are both immersion schools. And what they are is where, and correct me if I'm wrong, all of the lessons are done in the language. So whether it's Salish or Blackfoot, so that every subject is infused with the language, the language exists in every subject. Because if we take 20 minutes or 40 minutes 3 days a week, you're really not going to learn your language, because it changes in the other subjects and it influences all that. And I was struck by, how do you describe immersion? And I said, well, imagine if you leap off a dock into a lake or a river or something, and all of a sudden you're underwater and it's all around you. You're immersed in that water. And in these schools that we're fortunate to have in Montana and other parts of the state, you are in an environment where you are surrounded by that language. And how does that change your perspective of the world based on everything happening in that language? And if you remember a couple years ago when the Pope came to Canada and did that kind of dog and pony tour for reconciliation or whatever, and my favorite quote from all of that was Christy Belcourt, who's this wonderful Métis artist, said that if the Catholic Church really wants to reconcile with what happened during the boarding school era with the loss of languages, that they would fund Indigenous immersion language immersion schools across North America for 100 years. And I thought, yeah. And who, if not the Catholics, who can afford that? And they could. And that alone shows just how important language is, because that's the first thing they go after us with. But it also creates some challenges, James, and I'm gonna go with you because you have such a huge global reach with your various social media outlets and all of those things where you're sharing Ojibwe word of the day, and you often go into the cultural relationship of that word and what it means. And this is going out to anybody. And if there's one thing Indians are really good at, it's gatekeeping our own cultures and language. And if somebody comes up to you and asks you how you feel about them, is it okay? People ask me, is it okay if I greet you in Anishinaabe? How do you respond to that?
That's really insightful. And when I was asked that question before, like, should I greet someone in Anishinaabe or should I start learning the Ojibwe language? And I was like, this probably should have started 300 or 400 years ago, like when we came into contact with one another. I did French immersion in Quebec. And when I would greet French people, it wouldn't be in English. I would engage them in their language because I'm at their home. So I think whenever you're on the territory of a particular nation, to be able to greet them and say hello in their language, I think you should do that all the time. And I think we should get that message across. But it's hard to do because we have a very long and complicated relationship with 3 different empires, with the French Empire, the English Empire, with the American Empire, where there has been confusion with that, where there's always been one kind of seeking superiority over the other. And one of the main tools to do that, I think, is linguistically, through the language. And so I think that's really important to do. On that note, so many people have never had an opportunity to perhaps hear an Indigenous language. Not just here in Montana or in Native North America, but all over the world. So for me to take a few moments out of my day, having taught pre-K through university and immersion programs too, so I'm hanging out with the real superstars here, with the cool kids, to take a few moments and maybe engage them and have an opportunity to share something with them that they probably have never heard. We both walk away richer. It's a pure joy for me to be able to speak about those topics. And there's a genuine interest with human beings in language. Like, we all speak. That is one common ground where we can meet one another. And to have learned not just your word, but how that word influences the way you look at the world, we have a real chance at diplomacy. Maybe in like the best way, through speaking with one another. And so I've always enjoyed that part about sharing the language and about not gatekeeping it. Mm-hmm. Some of my elders, everyone who taught me Ojibwe went through the boarding school or residential experience. Each one of them had. It is, if you hear a lot about it today, it is because it still affects us generation after generation. Its effects did not just go away. We're still feeling them every time I talk to my teachers. Every time they teach me something, that is influencing it. And when they were talking about our culture, so much of our Anishinaabe, Ojibwe culture went underground. And it went underground because until 1978, you could be arrested for addressing someone in the language. If you were drumming, you could be arrested. If you went to a naming ceremony and they were coming down hard on this. This was, you know, a very, very unpleasant aspect of colonization that so many people went through. So people went underground about it, and they didn't speak about the language. They didn't speak about the culture. A lot of the spiritual part, it was misinterpreted that we're quiet about this because you're not supposed to speak about this, rather than we're quiet about this because we will face government repression for speaking about this. So now as we're older, as I'm the welcome and glad recipient of the, you know, the at least liberation with the 1978 Act, to be able to speak, to be able to offer tobacco, to be able to smudge without any fear of persecution or prosecution, to have a moment to begin speaking about these things with people. It's a very important aspect of both reconciliation and of healing as well, that we're not silent out of these things for fear, because, yeah, again, we can't be persecuted or prosecuted for that anymore. So an opportunity like this to speak to so many people whom I've never had the opportunity to meet or talk to, it's a real privilege. So miigwech for engaging with us.
So Shane, you're kind of the go-to guy in a very popular region, in a very popular part of the world with Yellowstone. I mean, the Yellowstone ecosystem, not that hellfire of a TV show. But it carries that label with it anytime you talk about Yellowstone, doesn't it? I bet you run into that. And you know, I'm not even entirely clear on the work that you do internationally as far as like the archaeological aspects of the work that you do and in the region you're in. And I'm wondering if you can talk about, because you absolutely are an ambassador of your people, because everywhere you go, you are Shane Doyle, a member of the Crow tribe. And like if we talk about the Anzac child and how that ancestor, that relative, is one of those perfect examples of how related all of us on the northern plains are. And I feel like I said earlier, you know, you ask an Indian, 10 Indians a question, you get 8 different answers, and the other 2 argue why the other 9 aren't even Indians. You're put in a position that you have to speak for a huge demographic of indigenous people. What is that like? What are the challenges of that when you get on a plane and you go somewhere and all of a sudden the American Indian appears and it's you and you're representing all of us, kinda?
Brevity is my friend. You know, I like to keep things short and sweet. I don't have a lot to say. Thanks. You know, the more you say, the more people can use against you, I guess. I'm glad Jesse brought up Daryl Kipp, because Daryl is one of the reasons why I'm in this position. You know, back in 2005 when Montana passed Indian Ed for All, then I started assuming the position of leadership because I just finished my master's degree in Native American Studies. I had teaching experience on the reservation. I was from Crow, and I was connected to the university in Bozeman. I was an instructor there, Native American Studies, and I was able to help with professional development of teachers. And so, can I give this short story? I mean, we got
The
a
more
little
you
time.
talk, the less I have to.
Oh,
But yeah, go
that's
for
cool,
it.
right?
Do whatever you need to do.
Yeah. So anyway, so when Indian Ed for All got passed and there was some money out for the districts, the Bozeman school districts came to the Native American Studies at MSU Bozeman, and they said, hey, we need your help. You know, what can we do with this money to teach our teachers how to teach this material? And MSU Bozeman said, we'll teach a class. We'll give them a class, and at the end of the class, we'll fly them to Washington, D.C., to the Smithsonian, the National Museum. And everyone was like, oh my God, that's such a great idea. And they said, Shane, what do you think about it? And I said, you know what? Crow Agency is about 3 hours from here, and it seems like it'd be a lot cheaper to get on a bus maybe and drive over there than to go to a museum in Washington, D.C., and you might actually get a little bit more on the res than you would on the bigger res, which was now really a res back in Washington, D.C. Pardon the pun or laugh or whatever, you can feel free. Anyway, that was the start of a grand tour. And so they said, well, go ahead, set it up then, Shane. And so that year we went to Crow Agency. I took 12 teachers to Crow in Northern Cheyenne, and we stayed in teepees. And then the next year we said, we'll go to Browning and Flathead. And, we'd had a great experience at all those places. Great, it was life-changing for everybody. And then we went to Daryl's school. And Daryl had always been a hero for me. I had seen his film about transitions, Death of a Mother Tongue, back in the 90s when Native Voices television, when he worked with him to produce that film. And sitting there with Daryl in that school with those teachers, I want to cry. I was thinking, I'm going to start crying if I tell this story, but I owe everything to Daryl too, to see someone with that kind of power and handle themselves that way with the poise, the confidence, the knowledge. I said, I want to be like that guy. That's quite a guy. And, looking at the Blackfeet community, they have so much leadership over the years. Thinking about Eloise Cabell, all that time she was doing that work when Daryl was doing that work. And I could go on and on about the leadership in the Blackfeet community that has inspired me. And those people, a lot of them, I never even got to meet. But they have influenced me and shown me that lead with your heart. That's traditional. And by the way, the language in here that all of us share is plain sign language. She was speaking it when she was introducing herself. And, that tells you that all the tribes here, we spent generation after generation after generation in a closed circle just like this. And everybody thinks we're fighting all the time. But our true legacy is a lingua franca that stretches across the northern plains and all across this continent, and it comes from love. And there's no other way to describe it. And plain sign language gets left out, it gets forgotten about, it gets dismissed as just a trade language. But think about the dedication. Think about the big lift that it must have taken to develop that language. And it shows you that, these people spend a lot of time around each other, sitting around, thinking about how we're going to make this language, teaching it to their children, meeting every single season, year after year, for hundreds of years, coat to shake. And that's our real legacy. That's why we can go to powwows, like you were saying, and sing the same kind of songs. That's why even though we have Sundances, they're all different, but they're based on the same thing, that medicine wheel. And that medicine wheel spawns that language, that sign language. And that's kind of what I like to talk about. Because if I try to talk about other things that I'm not all that familiar with, then I'm not being myself. And you want to talk about Native representation. As I've come to terms with the idea, if I can speak from the heart and it feels good, then I'm being traditional. And I had two sets of grandparents and great-grandparents of boarding school products. Stripped away. Both of my grandparents and my great-grandparents shipped off when they were 5 years old on trains to Carlisle and Haskell. And now people want me to speak my language. And they want me to show them all these different things about, Indian culture. Hey, Shane, what's this mean? Hey, Shane, how do you say that? Hey, man, my grandparents got sent to boarding school when they were 5 years old. I'm sorry. I can't answer that for you because I'm a product of that as well. And so I feel a lot, as these other panelists do, that it's a passion of mine to learn what it means to be a Native person in this continent. And today, 2025, not 1890 or 1978 or 2001, right now, because we're leading the way. If you pay attention, we have a lot of faults. We're not perfect, but we are leading the way. And we're not going to stop doing that. And so it's a real privilege to sit here with these individuals. Thank you.
Well, and I think also kind of the prescient nature of the way Cutswood you described as being founded without any state fund, we don't have any federal funds. Look what's happening in the world now. We've created this environment where we're totally reliant on the nonprofit, the grant industrial complex, and these people can decide, okay, we've already told you can have this, well, now you can't. And we have organizations like ones that I've worked with, community organizations, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Humanities, IAIA, which is the Indian Arts Institute of America, is losing a huge chunk of their funding, all because of this reliance on what I call basically the same game as treaties. Yeah, we're going to do this thing, but we're not going to withhold it. And I'm just struck by that relationship, that he recognized that we need to control this ourselves. We need to figure out how to make this work ourselves. And what a return to that we could make within our communities, within this kind of communities. The whole way this festival was funded by going out and saying, hey, look, we want to do this cool thing, and we think you'll think it's cool too, but we need some help, and we got it. And I just love the nature of that. I love what we are capable of doing when we just sit down and do it. Aspen, I want to come back to you now. Like if you go around Missoula, more and more we see signage and place names, and so often your name is associated with it. And that is something you're kind of doing independent. It's not like your tribal government is saying, Aspen, we need these things done. Will you go out and do it? And is that accurate? It's part of your passion. Does that create difficulties for you?
Yeah, I've done a lot of language work around Missoula, and that's actually a word I could leave with all of you is Inmesudle. Missoula comes from our language, and that means the place of the freezing water, which is about Glacial Lake Missoula. And I've actually done signage for the library here, so you could go to each level and see all the different Sedlish signage, and I have it in the language. And in Mesudle and teaching these place names, I feel like it's the most authentic way to show our culture, our language, who we are, because those place names show what we were doing in these locations and how far back do they go. What's that chronology, the entire 20-some thousand years of history. And if you're in Missoula and you think you know it, you don't if you don't know Salish history. And a lot of these other tribes that also utilized Missoula and came through here and our intertribal relations. And yeah, the work that I do and my husband, it's like an ambassadorship where we're kind of out of the box from the norm, I think within our community, or at least some of the first of its kind, because like these gentlemen were saying about that 1978 Religious Freedom Act, it wasn't okay until recently. This is my grandparents, and my mom, I think, was born by then. And so it's this generational healing, and a lot of things that were just more of like within the community are more of like within our tribal government, so the different tribal departments. And so now through our business, after I got my master's in linguistics, I knew that there was a need for teaching and at least informing people of who we are and whose land are you on within our Aboriginal territory. And a lot of people didn't know about Inmesudle, or that this entire valley was covered in bitterroot, and that all these trees were planted later in the 1900s. This used to be just grassland full of bitterroot and prickly peared cactus, and it was just this open valley. And I just feel like people need to know about it. And through all this signage, now I hear more and more people trying to inform me, like, oh, did you know that Missoula is in Mesule? And I was like, yeah, that's good. Like people are finding out about it, and they teach me, back. So, yeah, it's just really good work to see our language. I feel like it's also that sense of pride for our people when we come to Missoula, to our homeland, which a lot of us still come here. We utilize this place. We're still thriving and alive and here today. And so seeing our language, seeing the signage, I feel like it gives a sense of pride. Like, that's my people, that's my language. And it's also part of that cultural adaptation. Our language was an oral tradition forever and just signs. And until the 80s, we finally got a Sedlish written phonetic alphabet. And I actually love that alphabet because it's our way of like, here's our language. You could see it now. And it's a way to articulate the language correctly. So,
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not
one of my favorite photographs I have from visiting Browning Public School. There's a young girl standing in front of me. You can tell we're in conversation, and I remember that moment. And this goes back to you, like words didn't always exist. Words had to be created as new experiences and new interactions came into our world. So this young girl is explaining to me how, and Jesse, perhaps you can tell us what this word is, because I can't remember it. The Blackfoot word for horse literally translates as elk dog, correct? And she's standing there explaining this to me, and it's just one of those where the photograph, I remember the interaction we were having, and just loving how, sometimes people use that against you, like language doesn't just emerge from the universe. It has to be created as the world changes. And as we change, our languages and cultures change. And I grew up in the Missoula Valley, and to hear Aspen talk about what this land used to be covered with in prickly pear and bitterroot and everything, and even everybody else. This place used to be underwater. And I think there's like two important incidents that have ever happened in this valley. And the first one is probably when that ice dam broke and all that water flushed out. Because now all of these other life forms begin to emerge or come from other places, and they have to figure out a way to get along. The plants that were able to adapt to this place are the ones who flourished. The people who were able to adapt to this place were the ones who flourished. But there was a period of getting along in order for everybody to survive in reciprocity with each other. Well, then what comes along, I think it's probably the second most important thing that's ever happened in this valley, and that's the Hellgate Treaty out at Council Grove in 1855, which created the reservation and forced the removal of the Bitterroot Salish North and all that. And what a tremendous event that still reverberates in how we interact with each other every single day today. And I went to school 6 miles from there, Frenchtown Elementary, and then add a couple miles to where I went to high school at Frenchtown High School. I never knew anything about any of that. So it's the intentional elimination of the truth about what has happened in these places that folks like this are up against when it comes to re-educating or reigniting the relationships that we know we are capable of having with each other. I'm sorry, I got kind of on a tangent there, but that's what I love about this. I love the fact that we have people like this who have the courage to usually be the only Indian in the room, in many cases, telling these stories. And how does that reflect? And Jesse, I know you do cultural tours for non-native organization or representing your native community to settler things, like in Glacier National Park, for example. Can you talk about that work a little bit?
Well, it really inspired me how you said punokamita, but it reminded me of something in the language. We look at language as just English, right? And we perceive the universe as English and Christianity as American, as individuals, as capitalists, and we don't understand how different it is across cultures, right? Well, one thing with Blackfoot, we do refer to the horse as elk dog, punokamita, but ownership really changes, and just understanding how this shift happens can explain culturally the biggest difference between American capitalism and Blackfoot, and most indigenous views, but I can mainly speak for Blackfoot. Well, in Blackfoot view, we only own our body, and essentially it's borrowed, right? And Blackfoot has a transfer-based culture where if you get a war bonnet, that's a part of your body. So if I was to count coup on a crow, I could take his bonnet. That's taking a piece of his body, right? And it wasn't to death. It wasn't to kill. That's why there's no walls across America. But elk dog, again, punokamita, the word changes when it becomes an owned horse. So it goes from punokamita to nutas. Punoka is elk, imita is dog. Well, I asked my class, what is nutas? Why is it nutas? It's completely different. Why does it go from elk dog, punokamita, to nutas? Well, to understand that is to understand ownership. When I say nutas, I'm saying nutis, distum, nutukan. It becomes a body part, an attachment of a person's body. So when we rated horses, we weren't taking somebody's $500, $1,000, $2,500 horse. We were taking their legs. We were taking their ability to provide, to travel, to hunt. Every horse had a job and position, but we looked at ownership as a part of our bodies, right? And it goes to land. When we say our territory in Blackfoot, this is our food source. So when we defended it, we weren't defending some king's title. We weren't defending our rent. We were defending our life. This was our way of life. This is our Vatican. This is our old country. This is our Walmart. You know, when people ask, how important is Badger to medicine? Well, it's our Walgreens, but it's also our Vatican. But it's also, well, what part of it is sacred? Every part, you know. We didn't have to build mass temples. We got our knowledge from the environment. And our language is very scientific based, you know. I think the biggest confusion is people look at us as either mystic hippies or, you know, pitiful savages, ignorant, right? And I tell my students, don't ever allow Western education to make you believe you're primitive, because once you understand our identity and what we're saying in our language, we really have an identity, but not only that, we have something to give. And there should never be an opportunity where we're looked down on. We should never seek pity. We should always have something to give. And if we're not accepted as that, there's no point in working it out, you know. But we've always gave, and that's the history of our people. We've always gave. And I think oftentimes as Indigenous people, our identity has been stripped away so much. As a Marine, I know for war, you have to take away humanity to be able to do what happened. What is war, you know? And our government has given us different identities. They say you are this, or blood quantum, but to truly understand identity, you got to go back to language. You got to go back to protocols. You got to go back to the individual, you know, and get that for yourself. When you go to France, Germany, you ask them, who are you? I'm German. What makes you German? Is it the food? Is it they're German in and out, you know. We need to have that understanding as people today, you know, and respect ourselves and have something to offer. I don't know if I'm answering the question at all. I'm just going off.
No, that's it. No, I think that's great.
I have been punched a lot in the face. I'm sorry.
So, James, what's dangerous about that? So if we go back, what we're talking about, like the Religious Freedoms Act in 1970, Aspen, just, you know, you mentioned your grandparents might have been alive then. I was actually alive then. I had a stack of KISS records in 1978, you know. But there's a reason. So that happened. Those rights were lost, like during the ghost dance, right? Because the United States was so afraid of the movement that was beginning with the ghost dance. And so they said, well, we can't let these people have their traditions because it makes them powerful. James, can you talk about that from a language? I have an idea of what I want you to say. But you talk about how our words live on the other side of, like, the last ice age. And what does that mean? What does that mean for our people when we've survived all of these things? And what lives in the language as a result of that?
I liked how you added that last part. And again, hearing Blackfeet, which is a sister language to Ojibwe, to hear some familiarity.
Older than Algonquin.
Yeah.
Recent DNA studies.
And it's cool because, again, speaking about that huge landmark moment, we have recorded that in the language in Anishinaabemowin. We remember a time. If you use that word Nokomis, there's a small lake in the middle of Minneapolis named Lake Nokomis. Maybe you've heard it in a schoolcraft poem. Or Longfellow also talks about Nokomis. Comes from the Ojibwe word Nokomis. Nokomis, my grandmother. We can date that one easily prior to the ending of the last ice age. That is a connection. Every time you call mom, grandma, Nokomis, you're using a sound that someone who saw saber-toothed tigers, woolly mammoths, a mountain of ice a mile high before Gitchigami, the Great Lake, the Great Sea of the Anishinaabe, Lake Superior existed, you're using that same sound. and you're interconnected to them. For me, I'm always floored that, oh my gosh, I'm using an ancient sound. It is so cool. Now, if you can remove that connection that you've had to land with place names, like we remember why this is called Ga-Miskwawakukag, the place of many red cedars, why this is called Gitchio-Nigaming, Gazagasquajmekag, the place of many leeches, the big lake. We remember that. We have our connection. We are tied to the land. We remember the teachings that came from the land there. And they've been transmitted to us that if we listen closely to that language, we can literally hear those ancestors still speaking to us. We went through this experience. I have nothing physically that I can give to you, but I could give you this teaching that we learned and pass it down generation after generation. How will we do that? Well, we'll pass it down through the language. We'll interconnect it in the language. We will hear other tribes, and you'll recognize some of their words. They may not be the same, but remember, at one time we were relatives. At one time we were relatives. Now we speak a little differently. Maybe our ceremonies are a little different, but there's a familiarity there. And in that familiarity, it's so easy to establish a relationship. You never fight relatives. You don't go out and kill relatives or exploit them. They're relatives, they're family members. And you can do that through the language, which I am just amazed by time and time again when I return to that. So when you see that spearhead of colonization, it is like, okay, how can we get these people to forget these teachings that are literally thousands of years old, that connect them to the land? Where will we go? Well, the children. How will we get rid of those teachings? Well, we will separate them from the language. We'll separate them from their family. We'll separate them from the land. And then maybe they'll go along with our system of governance, with our religion, with our spirituality, with our economic ways. So to hear that importance of the language and bringing that back to children, to our youth, through immersion, through our educational programs that are in our Anishinaabe country, Anishinaabe King, are showing up at our colleges, our tribal colleges, as well as at universities. That's very inspiring, and that's a way to get back to where we're going. Those original great laws that were left to us, those original teachings that had worked for thousands of years, and I think would work for thousands of years to come. So for me, that really key part of the language is passing that down to the generations who are coming. And it may not be, as a language teacher who's done pre-K through university, who's done immersion, maybe you're hearing this and thinking, oh, I need to become a fluent speaker. And maybe you're at a certain point in your life where that might not happen. And that's okay. To learn a little bit about it can be a very enriching experience. And especially if it's not your culture, to learn about the culture whose land you're on, that can be a very enriching experience. It can be a moment that you can establish what I think our ancestors would have thought was sacred communication. That moment where we understand one another. Human beings using these sounds, phonemes, and morphemes to communicate a thought or idea. That moment where we understand and connect with one another. I think. So just to make that effort, maybe if it's not fluency, but understanding and a moment of, hopefully, friendship leads to reconciliation that is sorely needed now.
Yeah, the language proves that we weren't just how we're portrayed as just these kind of ignorant savages being buffeted about by the world. We were immersed in the creation of the world, the ongoing, nonstop creation of our lives and our relationship with the rest of the world. And that is what lives in the language. And I think that is why languages is what colonial powers go after first, is to disconnect the people from that rich heritage of survival and interaction with the world around us. And this kind of has turned into a language discussion, but how can it not when that's what culture is really? Language is the bedrock of it. So now I would like to turn it over to any of you who might have questions here for the next, yes.
Oh, I'm just always getting the mic, aren't I? Hinikaragi, hochangre, ma'e, mani, sisep, apskani, pikani, mismiso, kiaki, gahingairigna. Greetings, my name is Amy Kruver. I am known to my Hochangare people as Ma'e Mani, earth talking, earth walking. I am very blessed to have an Apskani Pikani name, Mismiso Kiaki, longtime prairie woman. And I am so incredibly inspired by this panel that I'm going to make a public commitment to be, what is it, tobacco level sponsor? So I'm going to dedicate from the Nature Conservancy $5,000 to this event. And I think that would get me a T-shirt, right? I saw some of those John Peppian T-shirts running around. But I'm doing this for a very important conservation lesson. Tribal languages are born out of tribal territories. And in my personal and professional career, I have relied on tribal language to teach us so much about conservation and stewardship. I look at all the Salish place names, and they teach us so much more than colonial white names for places. What did you go there for? What did you do there? How did you use this area? I'm very proud to have partnered in collaboration with the Salish Cultural Committee. I need to go back up and visit them. And, you know, we do a lot of work up on the Blackfeet Reservation. And this next year, I'm going to rematriate over 7,000 acres of land back to Blackfeet country, along with $1 million endowment that I have yet to raise. So if anyone wants to come talk to me after this. But I already have $5,000. That one's covered. But I just want to implore everyone in the Missoula community that, you know, it's really important to have these forums. And these people up here, you know, it takes a lot of courage to live the lives that they've lived. And it takes a lot of humility and courage to then get up here and share all of that with you. So what you have received today, what I have received today, is a tremendous gift. It's much more valuable than $5,000, but that's what I'll give. But I just want to say, Pinagigi, you've done well by me.
Can I add to that or say something real quick?
Yeah, do it.
I appreciate all the compliment. I want to also just point out, I'm not an expert in anything. You know, I had really great teachers and mentors, but as my grandpa would say, all I know is what I was told, and they don't tell me too much. You know, but I also wanted to say I think we're at a point in our history now where we understand exactly what colonialism, what genocide, what all those things did. Right? We could point out specifically and say, oh, the government killed our buffalo. The government created boarding schools. They put us on reservations. And we know exactly how many millions of dollars were spent taking our language. But at the end of the day, I can't go to Donald Trump and learn my Blackfoot language. I'm not going to go to the Vatican to get my cultural songs back, you know. So there's something to understand of not just recognizing that, but moving past that, we have to acknowledge the power and the resources we have in our own elders. And I don't like to hear we lost, we lose. When I was a kid, I would always be told, what's it like to speak a dying language? You know, and as an 8, 9-year-old boy, like, geez, what am I doing with my life? You know, I'm just here dying. Well, we're not dying, you know. I think one thing indigenous people have proved is we're pretty darn hard to kill off, you know. Yeah. And we're not going anywhere. But one thing with that is we need to go back into our own resources for our survival. And understanding there can be a collaboration. There could be something of two people uniting for good. But we can't wait. There's no Kevin Costner coming for us, right? Johnny Depp ain't that great, you know. Yeah. We have to find the solutions. And when there's answers we can't find, everything that we gain was from our land base or in your culture. And if you have access to that, we still have those resources and opportunities. So I get tired of people saying I can't, you know, because if you have that mindset, then don't. Go die. Our ancestors didn't have that mindset. You know, we can all complain and talk about how traumatic our lives, our ancestors, but the one thing is we're here now today. And what are we going to give to our children? You know, in Blackfoot culture, when we give a name, we give 4 coup stories, honor songs. All the elders I spent time with, I've never heard them once tell a sad story. I tell them it's in Ikukit. They tell me a story of a victory. They grew up in the hardest times of reservation life, but they'd tell a story. One time when they stole an apple from the store, and that was a victory, or a horse race, They never talked and shared that trauma. And it's okay to have that trauma. We got to understand we have processes to grieve and move on. But it's time that we give our next generation that opportunity to see themselves not as generational trauma, but as generational warriors, generational healers, and people that never quit, and aren't going to quit. We got to give them something to look forward to. And all that is in our language. All that is in our culture, is in our history. And if you ever need that inspiration, look at your ancestors. If you ever need motivation, look at your children. That should give you motivation to keep trying. Because we shouldn't do it for ourselves, our name or whatever, legacy. It's all BS. We're not doing it for compliments. What's coming next? That spark that we're going to light, that's what it's for. Don't ever quit. Always persevere. There's no trying. Persevere, That's it.
Yeah. Question?
Okay, so I have a new idea. As a non-native person, I'm taking to heart what you say about learning some pieces of language, even if you're not going to learn the whole thing. It gets really tricky in terms of not wanting to look like one of those bad appropriator people. But what about the sign language? I've never heard anybody talk about this, but if that was traditionally a place where different groups met and communicated, could it become going forward a place where different groups meet and communicate? I raised my children in this valley. They love it the way your children love it, and also in different ways because we have those differences too. But could that be a meeting ground to communicate moving forward? And if so, where do I learn it?
Hello? We're developing an app for that. Yeah. Believe it or not. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I know. It's exciting. We're really excited, and it's been on my mind for a long time. The app's not going to settle everything or, be the savior, but it can help. And I think, one of the things about Montana is, we're kind of an outpost. If you look at all the tribes in Montana, and I don't hope my Blackfeet friend here is not going to take offense, but they say the only language isolate is Kootenai, and these Algonquin speakers and even the Siouan speakers, and then the Salish speakers, of course, connected to the Pacific Ocean. Then you've got the Shoshone speakers, the Uto Aztecan, and they're all through the Rockies down into Mexico. And so everywhere in any four directions, you've got a group that came from someplace else. And when they got here, they figured it out. We'll make one language everybody can speak. And that sign language there is from Montana. It's not from Wyoming or Idaho. It's not from Canada. It's from here. Because if you cross over this divide over there, where the headwaters of the Missouri and the Yellowstone are, that's where everybody was at the Judith Gap. Every tribe in Montana was there. And that's where they were speaking that language. There's bitterroot and all those other plants are great, but you can't make teepees and stuff from those. You need to get some bison. And so you're going to have to travel over there, And so to me, that language is the Montana language. It should be known as the Montana language. And our music, the way you go to any powwow, whether it's California, New York, they're singing songs from Montana. Those come from here. Around this divide area. And so those are the things our kids should be learning. And because I never learned about Montana. I didn't even know, what was here, what happened, why are we forgotten about? Why do we never see ourselves in the movies? We have a lot to offer in terms of how to make a beautiful life in a place that is harsh and but also quite wealthy. And so if it was up to me, or if I was doing the Indian Ed OPI requirements, start introducing the language in kindergarten. Of course, that's the time when kids are most apt to learn a language. I've never seen any, even American Sign Language taught in our public schools, and that's a crying shame as well. But plain sign language is totally different from American Sign Language. It's based on a completely different set of, American Sign Language is based on the English alphabet mostly, a lot of it. Plain sign language is based on cardinal directions. It's the most sophisticated sign language in the world, and there's never been anything that even comes close. And so I think that's something, again, that we should celebrate. The app that we're developing, it's going to be a few years. I started a nonprofit last year called Yellowstone Peoples. And our goal is to put on a intertribal teepee village in the Yellowstone Park every year and have representatives from every tribe there. And we're still raising the money to do that. We had an event in 2022. We're going to have a small one in October. But next year, we're set to have another full-scale 13-lodge teepee village. And I feel like that nonprofit with that teepee village, we're trying to develop an app that will not only reveal all of the amazing history of the Yellowstone Park and the greater Yellowstone with all the tribes, but also, that's part of the sign language will be part of that revealing. Because right now, we don't really know anything. You go to the Yellowstone Park, there's no signs, there's no signage, there's no videos. You go to the museum, there's like one picture of a couple people, their names are not even on the, down at the bottom, you don't know who they are or what tribe they're from. We got a long ways to go in the Yellowstone Park and across Montana. So I'm glad you asked the question, because I think it's a language that anyone can learn. And when you pick it up, if you're able to pick it up and share it and speak it with others, you've got a special thing there, and that will also help you, tune in to the rest of tribal culture and heritage here in Montana, which my colleagues here, my friends, brothers and sisters agree that we're fighting hard to, make relevant, keep relevant in the ongoing thousands of years. Blah, blah, blah.
I just wanted to add to that real quick, just short and sweet. But one of your tribal members, Lanny Realbird, there's a PBS documentary that he was a part of, and they acknowledge and admit in that one that plain sign language inspired ASL. And at the time of boarding schools, when they were taking away our language as well as our sign language, they were really promoting deaf schools for ASL learning. So although they were taking from indigenous people, once again, they were punishing Indian people for being Indian, but taking what they could from Indian people to advance, But Lanny Realbird is a tribal member, one of my good buddies, and sign language is universal amongst the plains, And even before that, I think we have this idea, this illusion of all of us constantly fighting, right? And constantly at war. And if that was the case, I don't think anybody would have been here when any Europeans got here, But one thing you can never find across America is great walls. And you guys remember the great chief who tried to take over the entire continent? It never happened, right? There was never any leaders that did. We never had quarrels over religion, language, culture, And of course, we had skirmishes. We protected our food sources. But there was times and reasons, and it was completely different. But to believe we were always fighting and seeing these differences, we never looked at each other as different, We always see the similarities. And when we didn't have them, that's how we built them, was through sign, through understanding, through knowledge, My grandpa went east and took a wife, so I went west and took a Salish. No. And
since we're ad-libbing, sign language, very poetic, romantic language. When you say the goodbye in sign language, you say, "Until I see you again, I hope the sun rises in your heart." Shakespeare never even came up with that. That's the kind of, and imagine every time you said that to somebody, "I hope the sun rises in your heart." You're saying that to yourself too, right? We all know that. The way we treat others, it's coming from inside, And that's reinforcing that. And when they say it to you, there's a lot of love exchange there rather than just simple goodbye. And there's a video out online of the 1932 Plains Sign Language Conference at Browning. And if you ever go up there to the Plains Indian Museum, you'll see the footprints of all those men who participated in that event. They bronzed them. They put them in like clay molds, and then they've got bronze of all their feet out there. And it's pretty cool, and moccasins. And you can find that video online. And there's only about 10 minutes of it that you can watch, and there's all these different tribal members in there, and they're all talking sign language. And the first thing that occurred to me while I was watching that video was not the language, but the disposition. Because as soon as they start talking to each other, they start laughing. And you're wondering, why? I wonder what's so funny about this sign language, man. These guys are getting a kick out of each other. And so it's like, well, no, maybe it's not the sign language. Maybe it's just that they were more apt to laugh, you know what I mean? Like this guy was saying, we don't live our lives like sad sacks. There was a sign, a famous painting that came out, I can't remember what it was, what decade it was. It's probably before my time, but it's called The End of the Road. And there's an Indian on a horse like that, he's a sad sack, he's getting ready to go down. Man, my stepdad and his brothers really didn't like that. My stepdad, Richard Reelbird, and his brother, Kennard, artist. Yeah, you know him. And so if you ever go to Crow Agency, you'll see a big bronze statue of a warrior rising, lance in the air. And they said, that's us right there. Not this guy over here. I don't know who that one is. That one's me right there, and all of us. So I really appreciate it. It does my heart good, hearing this. Because we're warriors, and, we're not going gentle into that good night.
Yeah, if I could just kind of add a little more to that too, is I always feel like it's good when people want to learn our languages. But one thing that we didn't really touch base on too much, I feel like, during this panel is, we kind of shared our passion and why we share these things. But as far as like the appropriation side of things, the thing that I always think through, like me and my husband and my family, we always talk through like, what's the boundary, like how much do you share and how much do you not share? And I think growing up with a cultural upbringing and having those elders who are always like, this is not meant to be shared. There's things that I don't like to share, like anything that's ceremonies or certain things that are just culturally sensitive, it's not meant for outside the community. So I'm very deliberate in what I like to share and what I want to share. And so I think if you don't want to appropriate, I feel like it's just like, listen to us and take in the knowledge that we're willing to share. But sometimes people try to ask too much, and it's like, that's not meant for you. I don't really want to share these things. But yeah, I feel like, and also part of that appropriation is just being really overt with who you are. If you're not a Native person, then you need to say that. And I feel like that's where I get a lot of questions of people saying, can I wear a ribbon skirt or buy this Native jewelry? And I think it's really good that people want to help Indigenous artists and support them, but they need to be really overt that I purchased this from this Native person and I'm doing it to support Native peoples, or I'm learning the Sedlish language or this or that language, but it's not my language, it's their language. And yeah, it's a way that we could all communicate, even with English, French, other world language speakers, but that language, the sign language, was exclusively for Indigenous peoples. And so that is where we need to keep the integrity of our concepts, of our values, of our language. And so making sure that we're keeping that and sharing as much as, you would like to share, as far as like sharing the history. But as far as these panels and having Native voice, it has to come from the people. It needs to be Indigenous-led. It's not just taking a Native person's voice and saying, here's what I've heard, and this makes it Indigenous. It's not Indigenous if it's not quoted directly, and also allowing that credit to that community. And so for our community, there's been a lot of non-Natives coming in and taking. It's just been a taking of knowledge, writing books without saying which elder it came from, whose whose words are these? Instead, it just becomes theirs, like they were the ones. Same with like Lewis and Clark, the first people to come through here. They got named after our Bitterroot, even though we're the ones who had that root. That's our sacred root. And so really thinking about how can you be respectful and not appropriate, and making sure that you're sharing where your source comes from. I feel like we could go on and on about different examples. And I guess one other thing is a lot of people that live on the reservations, they think, I know Native people because I live here, so I'm like a part of the community. It's not the same. And so just because you taught on our reservation or you were around our Native people, it doesn't make you a Salish community member. It doesn't make you a part of their community. And that's just where really knowing your place is really important, with having that cultural humility and not appropriating. I'm not sure. Thank you.
James, did you have something to say?
Oh, we've dealt with some of those issues too at Anishinaabe King, with people coming from outside, maybe lots of academics publishing papers, maybe not citing sources, and then maybe getting an academy job, a job in the academy while everyone else is kind of kicking it back on the res. And so, because the people who were teaching them had a very specific way of citing their teachings. I learned this from this man. He learned it from this man. And often you would hear someone go back maybe 100 to 150 years in like a few moments. Like, this is who I heard it from. And so it's important to acknowledge that. I'm kind of fortunate. Anishinaabe culture and spirituality polices itself really well. Like, there's nothing that I could share on Instagram that I would be able to, because I haven't done those particular ceremonies, which is fine. And we're not also unique like this. I know it's a problem that's happened in a lot of communities, but there are particular Buddhist and Hindu teachings that you're not going to receive if you go and approach a monk in a robe that he will just give to you. They will. It's like, well, do you want to join the monastery and meditate about this for 15 years? And then we'll talk about it, And not a lot of people at that point are like, no, I don't think I want to do that. So we kind of run into that, but we're not unique that way. But there's also that sensitivity and an understanding of relationship in our community. And you guys were so insightful. Miigwech.
Well, miigwech, all of you, we're kind of out of time. I feel like there are many topics that we can continue down, but this is it. So miigwech to all of you for coming and filling this room. And again, my utmost respect and gratitude for you taking the time out of your days to come and share with all of us. I'm very grateful for having you here, miigwech.
Miigwech Bisadawik. Thanks for listening.